Your average backpacker does not have a huge wad of cash in his wallet or in his bank account. But this bizarre travel trend takes budget travel to a whole new level. In fact, begpacking could just be the worst travel trend yet to emerge. But what is begpacking? Why does it exist? Stay tuned to learn more. The word begpacking is a combination of both begging and backpacking. It's a relatively new phenomenon, but it doesn't really need much explanation. It is essentially a backpacker who begs. Yes, you heard that right. While most of us spend months working hard and saving up the pennies for our trips overseas, begpackers simply ask passers-by in the street to fund their adventures. Typically, begpackers travel to a less developed country with little or no means of financially supporting themselves, and spend part of their time overseas begging the locals or other travellers to fund their travelling. Whilst begpacking may sound like a made-up term, it is actually defined in the dictionary. And in 2017, the Urban Dictionary defined the term as backpackers busking or begging to fund their travel. Begpacking is essentially an example of niche tourism, and it's a subset of backpacking too. Thankfully, it isn't too common just yet to come across begpackers on your travels, but who knows if this trend might really start to catch on. Although the term begpacking is a relatively new term, the idea of Western backpackers begging for travel funding is not. In fact, this travel trend has made its way to countries long before its scrutiny on the internet. You could argue that hitchhiking was an early form of begpacking. This has happened for years in many countries around the world, and it certainly isn't anything new. In modern society, backpackers demonstrate the reality of being able to travel the world with as little money as possible. The thought of being able to travel the world without spending huge amounts of money is becoming more and more desirable among individuals, particularly in millennials and centennials. But has begpacking taken it a step too far? There are three major methods of begpacking that are used by tourists. The first method is the traditional method of begging. Typically, a begpacker will beg locals to fund their travel by sitting in front of a handwritten sign that explains their desire to travel and the help needed for funding. Others choose to turn to busking. It is common to see travellers busk in the streets. If you're travelling with an instrument, or you can get hold of an instrument, you can busk in local streets, where busking is legal, that is. And then there's selling. There are alternative ways to begpack, and one of these is by selling goods or services on the street. Many tourists choose to sell handmade art, jewellery, or other crafted items, for example. In order to actually make money, the vast majority of begpackers can be found in busy urban areas, where there is a high opportunity of people passing by. However, it is important to note that begging, and therefore begpacking, is not legal in all countries. For example, Vietnam has implemented a national ban on street begging, and in most Southeast Asian countries you are not supposed to earn money on a tourist visa, and therefore begging is illegal. And where begpacking remains a common occurrence, stricter measures have been applied to avoid cases of begpacking. For example, Thailand have enforced visitors to prove that they have at least $525 in cash before allowing entry into the country. Although, how strictly this is enforced is another debate. So, we know that it exists, but where does it exist? In the past, begpackers were a rare sight, but in modern society, this type of travel has become a fairly common occurrence, particularly in Southeast Asia. The rise in contemporary discussion circulates stories largely aimed towards begpackers in Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore. A couple of years ago, 2 Western travellers caused fury after begging locals to help continue funding their travel. As the Daily Mail reported, the travellers sat alongside their handwritten sign that read, "My name is Alex, I'm travelling in Asia for 15 months. Sadly, I'm out of my savings, but I stay positive." Is it just me, or is there really some kind of ethical dilemma surrounding this? Let me know your views in the comments. The reality is that most begpackers come from middle-class, westernised backgrounds. They are not the sort of people that you would expect to see begging on the streets. So why are they choosing to be begpackers? I guess they feel that this is the only way to prolong their travels. But is it right? Is it ethical? Begpacking typically occurs in countries that are not highly developed and where there are people who turn to begging because they have no other way to feed their children or to pay their bills. Not so that they can go to the full moon party at the end of the month. Many people would argue that begpacking is in reality an induced or inauthentic representation of poverty, and that the begpacker can in fact remove themselves from this situation at any given moment by simply returning to their home country and getting a job or by claiming the social benefits there. In contrast, these people are surrounded by real poverty, even if it doesn't present itself on the side of the street as they choose to. On top of this, selling art, jewellery and other crafted items will often take potential earnings away from local people, who are probably more in need of the cash than a backpacker is. Of course, we don't know the reasons that all of these backpackers turn to begging, and there really could be a legitimate reason for it. But from where most of us are standing, it doesn't really appear to be an ethical or a sustainable form of tourism at all. In fact, it looks like it's quite the opposite. The reality is that for many begpackers, travel is a luxury, not a necessity, and they're putting themselves in this situation that they're in by choice. Quite frankly, it is, in the majority of circumstances, a selfish and irresponsible way of travelling, and it needs to stop. Thankfully, there are now many alternative opportunities for cash-strapped travellers, such as woofing or volunteer tourism. And I, for one, hope that people who would consider begging might turn to those alternatives instead. Let me know what you think about begpacking. Is it ethical? Is it right? Is it wrong? Let me know your views, I'm really interested to know. And if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like.